In this video, we'll be building the Frost debuff. As you'll remember, the Frost debuff is a particle effect which attaches to the enemy and eventually freezes them in place. I'm going to start by creating a particle system. I'm going to do that by going to the hierarchy window and selecting Create Particle System. I'm going to rename this particle system Frost Debuff. The first particle system in this effect is going to throw out some ice chips. This time, we're going to do all of our editing in the particle effect window, which I've nested right next to the console window. In case you don't remember how to get the particle effect window, looking at any particle system component, there's a button that allows you to either hide the editor or open the editor. Then it's just a matter of docking it where you'd like it in the editor. The duration of this Frost debuff particle system is going to be 1. Also, we won't normally want it to be looping, but we'll leave looping on for now while we test. I'm going to reduce the start lifetime down to 1, and I'm going to set the start speed to be a random between two constants. Those constants will be 5 and 10. I'm also going to reduce the start size down to 0.25. For start rotation, again I'm going to choose a random between two constants. And those values are going to be -90 and 90. I'd like gravity to pull these down, so I'm going to change the gravity modifier to 1.5. I'm going to change the scaling mode to shape. For the emission, I don't want there to be a constant emission rate, so I'm going to reduce the rate to 0. Instead, I'm going to add a burst. The burst is going to be a minimum and maximum of 10. For the shape, I'm going to leave a cone with an angle of 25. However, I'm going to reduce the radius down to 0.01. And I'm also going to choose random direction. Next, since I want my particles to fade out instead of just simply disappearing, I'm going to add a color over lifetime. In order to add a new module while using the particle effects window, I'm simply going to click the plus icon in the upper right of the default particle system module. I want the gradient for this color over lifetime to simply start at full opacity and then eventually fade to 0 opacity. I'd also like this to have a very strong rotation over lifetime. For the rotation over lifetime, I'm actually going to change it to be a random between two curves. Those curves are going to go between 400 and -400. I'd like to add some variance to this, so I'm going to go ahead and create sort of a funnel shape. Any bits that I can add to really vary up the way this looks is going to make it feel more realistic. From here, I'm going to go down to the renderer module, and I'm going to change the material from the default material to ice bits. As we can see, ice bits is obviously multiple particles in a single texture. To correct this, I'm going to add the texture sheet animation module. For this texture, I have only one column with 4 rows. Now that the Frost debuff parent game object is done, I'm going to go ahead and add some mist. To add a new particle system, I'm actually just going to click on this plus icon right next to the Frost debuff in the particle effects window. I'm going to change the duration to only 0.5. And I'm going to change the lifetime also to 0.5. The start speed will be a random between two constants with values of 5 and 10. For start size, I'm going to set this as 4. Just like the ice bits, I'm going to go ahead and apply some gravity by changing the gravity modifier to 1.5. I'm also going to change the start rotation to be a random between two constants with a value of -90 and 90. The scaling mode will be set to shape. I'd like some more particles emitted, so I'm going to change the rate to 30. For the shape, just like the ice bits, I'm going to leave the cone with a regular angle, however I'm going to reduce the radius to 0.01. And I'm going to emit in a random direction. So that we can see the effect our changes are having as we build this, I'm going to go ahead and apply a new material. I'm going to change the material from default to Dusty Cloud Additive. So that our ice mist doesn't go too far, I'm going to go ahead and add a limit velocity over lifetime, and I'm going to set the speed to 5 with a dampening of 0.25. I'd also like this to be a blue color, so I'm going to go ahead and add a color over lifetime. That color is going to start as a strong blue. And it'll fade to white. It'll also start at full opacity and fade to completely transparent. So that I give this mist another random rotation, I'm going to add a rotation over lifetime module. Now the rotation I'd like to give this is the same as the rotation over lifetime I gave the ice bits or the frost debuff parent. So that I don't have to recreate that exact curve system, I'm going to add it as a prefab. I'm going to do that by selecting it so that it appears on the right in the curves editor, and then I'm going to click the cog at the bottom. Then I'm simply going to hit new to add this as a new preset. Now, when I come over to the rotation over lifetime module of this mist particle system, I'm going to change it to be a random between two curves, and in the window, I'm just going to click the preset of the curves I just created. Now we can see the ice bits flying in the air and our ice mist working just great. Now since I added this particle system using the particle effect window, it just has the generic name particle system 2. I'm going to go ahead and rename that by going to my hierarchy and then right clicking on particle system 2 and saying rename. I'm going to call this freeze hit underscore mist. I'd like to add another particle system, this time for the ice block that will appear when it's time to freeze the enemy. Again, I'm going to quickly go through the values for our ice block effect. Our duration is going to be 2 seconds, with a start lifetime being a random between 0.7 and 2. Our start speed will also be random between 0.15 and 0.3. Finally, our start size will be 2.4. Now I don't want this particle system to emit as many particles, so I'm going to go to emission and change it from 10 down to 5. I'm also going to change its shape and reduce its radius to 0.01. Just like the others, I'm going to choose random direction. I'm going to go down to the renderer and give myself my custom material by clicking the circle selector next to the default name and choosing ice bits. To get this to look right, I'm going to add the texture sheet animation module. As we can remember from the first particle system we did, there's one column and 4 rows. To give this a more random look, we're going to add a color over lifetime and a rotation over lifetime module. The color over lifetime module is going to be used to cause our ice particles to fade in and out. I'm going to achieve this effect by starting and ending with 0 alpha. Then in the middle, I'm going to come up to about a little above half alpha. This is going to cause each of these ice bits to just sort of appear very briefly. I'm also going to change the rotation over lifetime to again be a random between two curves. Just like the other two particle systems, I'm going to use the preset that I created. Ideally, we could be done with the ice blocks there. However, I'd like to add just a little bit more randomness to it. So I'm going to come back up to the default emitter module, and I'm going to give this a random start rotation between -90 and 90. I'm also going to change its simulation space to world. And under the texture sheet animation, I'm going to change it from whole sheet to single row, leaving checked the random row value. Now we can see they don't cycle through the rows, and instead just pick one row randomly. Also, even though the frost debuff will be placed on the enemy, which will kind of be at their feet, we really want the ice block to appear over top of them. As such, I'm going to lift it up a little bit by selecting it in the hierarchy window and lifting it up to about 0.5. While I'm here, let's go ahead and rename this to Frost Ice Block. The last particle system we need for this effect is a mist that will be a child of the Frost Ice Block. Luckily, it's pretty much exactly the same as the freeze hit mist we already have. So I'm going to right click on that and select duplicate, and then make that a child of the Frost Ice Block. Now, to differentiate this one, there will be a few slight differences between this freeze hit and the original freeze hit. Namely, I'm going to change the start speed to something a bit slower. My values are going to go from 5 and 10 to being now 2.4 to 1. I'm also going to change its start size from 4 to 2.8. I also don't want the gravity to pull it down. In fact, I want the gravity to sort of lift it up. And to do that, I'm going to set the gravity modifier to -0.08. I'm also going to change its simulation space from local to world. Now, the two mist game objects are going to be very similar, however, just different enough that their effects won't completely overlap. Last thing I need to do to complete this Frost Debuff prefab is I need to select the Frost Debuff parent object in the hierarchy window and add a script. That script is going to be the Frost Debuff script, which I'll add by clicking Add Component, Scripts, Frost Debuff. It wants to know what my mist is and what my ice block is. So I'll click and drag the first freeze hit mist game object onto the mist property, and then the ice block game object onto the ice block property. I'm going to leave the rest of these just as they are now. Because the enemies aren't frozen solid as soon as the frost debuff is applied, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the frost ice block game object. Then, my frost debuff script can turn it on when it's ready to start freezing the enemy. The last thing we have to do is save our frost debuff as a prefab. So I'm going to go to my prefabs folder, and then my VFX subfolder, and click and drag frost debuff down into the project view.